Okay, so you're probably here because you, well, you really value your time
Right.
and you're smart.
Yeah.
Like you're someone who gets things done,
Definitely.
and you probably also appreciate maybe finding a shortcut or two.
Yeah, who doesn't love a good shortcut?
Exactly.
Especially if it's like valuable.
Yeah, and efficient.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking at today
Yeah.
with this book,
Yeah.
The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss.
It's a pretty famous one, I would say.
Yeah,
And it's a pretty interesting concept.
it is.
So the main idea, and probably what got you interested in this book, is the idea that you can kind of separate how much money you make from how many hours you actually work.
Right.
And Ferriss actually did this himself.
Yeah.
He was working like 14-hour days,
Oh, wow.
and he got it down to like a 4-hour work week,
It's pretty amazing.
and was actually making more money.
Really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
So it makes you kind of rethink
Yeah.
how you spend your time? Absolutely.
And your energy and all
Yeah,
that.
totally. And that's kind of what we're aiming to do today.
Yeah.
Is really kind of dig into how he did that
Right.
and figure out, how someone like you,
Right.
someone who, thinks strategically,
Right.
can apply these principles.
Yeah, exactly.
And, even if you're not trying to like totally change your life,
Yeah.
just thinking about how to optimize your approach to work and life.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of interesting ideas here.
Definitely.
And it's not really about, just like little productivity hacks. It's
Yeah.
about like fundamentally changing the way you think about
Yeah,
effort and reward.
definitely.
And it's interesting because this book got a lot of praise from people in all sorts of different fields.
Oh, yeah.
Like Dan Partland, who's an Emmy-winning producer.
Wow.
He really liked the book. He talked about how Ferriss really, breaks down conventional wisdom. And then John Lusk from Microsoft, he's a product manager over there.
Okay.
And he recommended the book for people who are trying to have a more fulfilling life.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just for like entrepreneurs or anything.
Yeah.
It seems like it resonated with people in all different kinds of work environments.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and Ferriss himself has done a lot of different things.
Oh, yeah.
Like he was a cage fighter.
What?
Yeah,
No way.
and he holds a world record in tango.
Seriously?
Yeah, and he lectured at Princeton.
Wow.
So he's kind of all over the place.
He's a fascinating guy.
Yeah, and I think that, his background kind of gives him a unique perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
So the first thing Ferriss does in the book is he really like challenges how we think about work.
Okay.
That question
Mhm.
everyone always asks, like, what do you do?
Right.
Most people just like have their work answer ready to go.
Yeah.
But imagine if work wasn't like the center of your life.
Right.
What would you say then?
Mm.
For Ferriss, like, depending on when you asked him, he might have said, I'm racing motorcycles across Europe.
What?
Yeah. Or I'm scuba diving in Panama, or I'm training Muay Thai in Thailand.
Wow.
Or like learning to tango in Argentina.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And these weren't just like little weekend trips for him.
Right.
This was like his lifestyle.
Yeah.
He designed his life so that he wasn't stuck in,
The typical.
the typical 9 to 5. And I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting to think about.
It is.
Like, if you didn't have to worry so much about time or where you were,
Yeah.
what would you really be doing with your life?
That's a good question.
Right.
I don't know.
It makes you think.
Yeah.
And Ferriss really believes that, you should enjoy the rewards of your work now.
Right.
Like, you shouldn't have to wait until retirement.
Yeah.
Because what if retirement doesn't work out how you planned?
Right. What if you don't even make it to retirement? Scary to think about.
Yeah, and so he talks about this idea of, relative income versus absolute income.
Okay.
So let's say you have two people and they both make $75,000 a year.
Okay.
Person A works 60 hours a week.
Right.
Person B works 15 hours a week.
Okay.
So Ferriss would say that person B is actually a lot richer
Yeah.
because they're making the same amount of money,
Right.
but they have way more free time.
Exactly.
So it's not just about like how much money you make in total.
Yeah.
It's about how much you make for every hour that you work.
Yeah.
And he calls this, being part of the new rich.
Okay.
It's not about being like super wealthy.
Right.
It's about having enough money to live comfortably
Yeah.
and having a lot of free time.
That's the dream.
Right. And this kind of ties into how you think about stress too.
Oh, yeah.
Because Ferriss talks about Two kinds of stress.
Huh.
Eustress and distress.
Hmm.
Eustress is like the good kind of stress.
Mm.
It's the kind you get when you're challenged,
Right.
but you know you're growing and,
Mm.
and it's exciting.
Yeah.
And then distress is like the bad kind of stress.
The kind that makes you want to pull your hair out.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so the new rich try to minimize distress
Okay.
and focus on eustress.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to really even think about making these kinds of changes,
Yeah.
Ferris says you have to deal with your fears.
Right, because that's what holds a lot of people back.
Exactly. And he has this technique called fear setting.
Fear setting.
Yeah.
What's that?
So it might sound kind of weird,
Oh.
but instead of like focusing on your goals,
Right.
you actually sit down and like plan out all the worst case scenarios.
Oh.
Like what's the absolute worst thing that could happen if you tried to do something?
Interesting.
Yeah. So like, let's say you want to ask your boss if you can work remotely,
Right.
or you want to start that side business you've been thinking about.
Yeah.
You know, what's the worst that could happen?
I could get fired.
Right. Or your business could fail.
And I'd be broke.
But by like really thinking about these things
Yeah.
and like planning for them,
Right.
the fear kind of loses its power.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, because you're not afraid of the unknown anymore.
Right.
You know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And Ferris even says that a lot of times the worst case scenario isn't even that bad.
Really?
Yeah, like it's just a minor inconvenience.
Oh.
And he actually quotes Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia,
Okay.
who said that, not doing something because you're pessimistic,
Oh.
like you think everything's hopeless,
Right.
is basically the same as not doing something because you're overly optimistic.
Like you think it's going to be easy.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So by actually like defining what could go wrong,
Yeah.
you can actually make a more informed decision.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've done your fear setting.
Uh-huh.
You're ready to start making changes.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so where do you start?
That's the question.
Ferris talks about efficiency and elimination.
Okay.
So he introduces this principle called the 80-20 principle.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's also called Pareto's law.
Right.
And it basically says that like 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort.
Right.
So Ferris says you can apply this to all sorts of things,
Like what?
like making money
Okay.
and even dealing with customers.
Really?
Yeah, he actually found out that like only 5% of his customers were making him 95% of his money.
Wow.
And that like 2% of his customers were causing him like most of his problems.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so he actually fired those 2% of customers.
He fired them.
Yeah.
How do you fire a customer?
Basically, he just stopped working with them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he also started like minimizing his interactions with the other 95% of
Customers
customers.
who weren't making him much money.
Right.
Okay.
And by doing that, he was able to really focus on those top 3% of customers,
Yeah.
and his business actually did way better.
How much better?
Like over 50% better in just a month.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So it really shows you how powerful it can be
Hmm.
to prioritize
You better.
and to be willing to let go of things that aren't working.
Right.
And this leads to another interesting point that Ferris makes,
Okay.
which is that sometimes being busy is actually a form of laziness.
What?
Yeah, because you're
Yeah.
you're avoiding the things that are really important.
Okay.
But maybe they're also difficult or uncomfortable.
Right.
So you fill your day with all these little tasks
Yeah.
that make you feel productive,
Uh,
but they're not actually moving you forward.
I could see that.
Like, spending hours organizing your inbox.
Yeah.
Or going to meetings that could have been emails.
Oh, right.
It's like you're just trying to avoid the real work.
I've definitely been guilty of that.
Yeah, I think we all have.
So what's the solution?
Well, Ferris talks about shifting from time management to attention management.
Okay.
So it's not just about fitting more things into your day.
Right.
It's about focusing on the things that really matter.
The important few.
Exactly.
Got it.
And one way to do that is to use a technique called batching.
Batching.
Yeah. So instead of like switching back and forth between different tasks all day,
Right.
you group similar tasks together and do them all at once.
Ah.
So like, for example, Ferris Melly checks his email twice a day.
Really?
Yeah.
Only twice a day?
Yeah, like maybe once around noon and once in the late afternoon.
Hmm.
And he even has a special auto reply that he uses.
What does it say?
It basically says, I check email twice daily. If urgent, call me.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, so people know not to expect an immediate response.
Right.
And it frees up a lot of his time.
Definitely.
And the key here is that you're creating boundaries.
Right.
So you're not letting email and other little tasks take over your whole day.
Yeah.
You're setting aside specific times for them.
Makes sense.
And then you can focus on more important things.
Absolutely.
And Ferrazos takes this idea of protecting your attention even further
Okay.
with what he calls a low-information diet.
A low-information diet.
Yeah.
Ah,
So basically, it means minimizing how much news and other non-essential information you consume.
oh, wow.
Yeah, I know it sounds kind of radical,
It does.
but his argument is that a lot of news is either irrelevant to you,
Right?
or it's negative,
Yeah.
or it doesn't actually give you any actionable insights.
True.
So he says you should ask yourself before you consume any information,
Okay.
will I definitely use this information for something immediate and important?
That's a good question.
Right.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no,
Yeah.
it's probably not worth your time.
Probably not.
And this is really important today
Yeah.
because there's so much information out there.
It's overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's constantly coming at you.
It's like a fire hose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by being more selective about what you consume,
Right.
you can really reduce your stress levels
That makes sense.
and free up more mental energy. And Ferris even talks a little bit about speed reading techniques.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not like to become a trivia expert or anything,
Right.
but just as a way to process information more efficiently.
Okay.
Like he mentions using a pen or your finger as a guide while you're reading.
Oh, yeah, to keep your eyes moving.
Right, and to prevent you from going back and rereading things.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And he also talks about like focusing on the middle of each line.
Okay.
So you can use your peripheral vision to see more words at once.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all about being more intentional with how you read.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so we've talked about elimination and efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
and now Ferris moves on to automation and outsourcing.
Okay.
And this is where you can really start to detach yourself from the day-to-day grind.
Sounds good to me.
Right.
Yeah.
So he introduces the concept of using virtual assistants or VAs
Uh-huh.
to handle a lot of the tasks that you would normally do yourself.
Right.
And he even mentions some early platforms like Your Man in India or YMII.
Yeah.
Brickwork.
I've never heard of those.
Yeah. They were some of the first companies that really started connecting people with remote workers.
Interesting.
And the main advantage of using VAs is that you can tap into a global talent pool
Right.
and often find people who can do the work for a lot less money
Yeah. That makes sense.
than you would pay someone locally.
Right.
And Ferris talks about how you can outsource all sorts of things,
Like what?
like market research,
Okay.
writing business plans, managing your schedule,
Right.
even like tracking down discontinued products that you can't find anywhere else.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really about delegating those tasks
Yeah.
that are time-consuming but don't necessarily require your specific expertise.
Makes sense.
So like imagine having someone else book your travel arrangements
Oh, yeah.
or handle customer service inquiries
Right.
or research potential business opportunities for you.
That would be amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
And you could be doing all that for a fraction of the cost of hiring someone locally.
It sounds almost too good to be true,
I know, right?
but I guess it's not.
No, it's not.
Okay, so what about like security and privacy?
Right. That's a good question.
Because if you're giving someone access to your information,
Yeah,
you want to make sure it's safe.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And Ferris talks about that.
Okay, good.
He says, you should always have a non-disclosure agreement or NDA
Right.
with your VAs
Yeah.
and make sure they're using secure internet connections.
Okay.
And he points out that, there are always risks when you're sharing information online,
Right.
but there are ways to minimize those risks.
Yeah.
And he even suggests that sometimes working with a VA company
Yeah.
might actually be more secure.
Really?
Yeah, because they have more robust security protocols
Interesting.
than you might have on your own personal computer.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the other thing that's really important when you're working with VAs
Yeah.
is communication. Ferris Tanges really stresses that you need to be super clear
Yeah.
and give very detailed instructions.
Right.
Because the more specific you are up front,
Yeah.
the better the results will be.
That makes sense.
And he even gives examples of like how to structure your task requests
Okay.
so that there's no room for ambiguity.
That's helpful.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it kind of forces you to become a better communicator
Right.
and a better manager.
Even though they're remote?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about automation.
Mm-hmm.
And now Ferris takes it a step further with this idea of creating muses.
Muses.
Yeah.
Like the Greek goddesses.
Kind of.
Okay.
But in this context, a muse is like an automated or semi-automated business
Okay.
that generates income for you
Right.
without you having to be actively involved in it all the time.
So like passive income.
Exactly.
Okay.
So like think about an online store
Okay.
or a digital product or
Mhm.
something like that, where you can set up systems and outsource a lot of the work.
Yeah.
And it can basically run on autopilot.
Wow.
Yeah, and Ferris talks about how, you need to choose a niche market
Okay.
and create something that people really want,
Right.
and then leverage online platforms to automate as much as possible.
Like marketing and
Right,
sales.
and fulfillment and all that.
Makes sense.
And he says it's important to avoid businesses
Yeah.
that require a lot of customer service
Yeah.
or your constant attention,
Right.
because the whole point is to create a business that works for you,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so finally we get to the part where all of this comes together,
Okay.
and it's all about liberation and lifestyle design.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so this is where you can really start to live a life with more freedom and flexibility.
Awesome.
And a big part of this is the idea of mini retirements.
Mini retirement.
Yeah, so instead of working for decades
Right.
and then retiring all at once,
Yeah.
Ferris suggests taking extended breaks throughout your working life.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you could travel or
Right.
learn something new
Right.
or just pursue your hobbies.
Yeah.
And these breaks could be like weeks or months long.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all about experiencing life now
Right.
instead of waiting until you're old and gray.
Makes sense.
And you might be surprised to learn that this can actually be pretty affordable.
Really?
Yeah, because the cost of living in some other countries
Yeah.
is way lower than it is here.
Okay.
Like Furious talks about how you can live really well in places like Buenos Aires or Berlin for a lot less money than you would spend at home.
Interesting.
Yeah, so suddenly long-term travel becomes a lot more realistic.
Definitely.
And he also addresses some of the common concerns that people have about traveling,
Like what?
like safety.
Okay.
And what if you have kids?
Right.
And he gives examples of how people have made it work.
Okay.
And for people who are worried about staying connected, he recommends using travel reward programs
Right.
to get free flights
Right.
and buying local SIM cards
Yeah.
so you can have a phone number in the country you're visiting,
Makes sense.
and setting up clear voicemail and email auto responses
Yeah.
so people know that you're not going to be available all the time.
Right.
And then the most important thing
Yeah.
is to fill the void.
The void.
Yeah, the void that's created by working less.
Okay.
Because if you're not careful,
Yeah.
you can end up just feeling bored and restless.
Right.
So Ferris says you should find things that you're passionate about
Yeah.
and spend your time doing those things,
Like what?
like learning a new language,
Okay.
or taking up a new hobby,
Yeah.
or volunteering,
Right.
or just spending more time with your loved ones.
That sounds nice.
Right.
Yeah.
And he points out that learning a new language is actually not that hard.
Really?
Yeah, especially if you're an adult,
Okay.
because you can focus on it and you have more life experience to draw on.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he also talks about some of the common mistakes that people make
Okay.
when they're trying to live this kind of lifestyle.
Like what?
Like confusing activity with productivity.
Right.
So just because you're busy doesn't mean you're actually accomplishing anything
Yeah.
and making things urgent
Okay.
that aren't actually time sensitive.
Right.
So it's all about being more intentional with your time
Definitely.
and choosing to do things that really matter to you.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the 4-hour work week,
Uh-huh.
I think the main takeaway is that creating a life with more freedom and flexibility
Yeah.
is totally possible.
It is.
It's not just some pipe dream.
Right.
It takes some unconventional thinking
Yeah.
and some strategic action,
Definitely.
but it can be done.
It can.
And I think someone like you,
Yeah.
with your, ability to think strategically,
Right.
could really make this work.
I think so too.
And what's really cool is that Ferris gives you a really practical framework
He does.
for how to do it.
Yeah.
So even though some of his ideas might seem kind of radical,
Yeah.
he actually breaks it down into really manageable steps.
That's helpful.
Yeah. And so I guess the question for you is,
Hmm.
what's one small step,
Yeah.
maybe even something that seems unrealistic right now,
Okay.
that you could take to start reclaiming your time
Right.
and designing a life with more freedom?
That's a good question.
It could be a difficult conversation
Okay.
or a small experiment
Yeah.
or even just a shift in your perspective.
Right?
But sometimes the biggest journeys
Yeah.
start with a single step.
I like that.
Yeah.